Okay, guys, thank you all for coming this morning. We are in for a treat because I don't know how fortunate you guys know that you are to have a nationally known author to come and visit Northside High School and to present to you, but this is not something that happens ordinarily on campuses. So when I sent out the email to let the other librarians know that we had Miss Nikki Grimes coming to visit with us here at Northside, they were all envious. So guys, count yourselves blessed that you will be able to have a little dialogue with her after she gives her presentation, and it's something that you will be able to treasure for your life. If you have not read, and I think everybody in here has read at least one of her books, please check out one. We have them displayed in the cabinet there. She has some awesome stories told through poetry, and she's got a wonderful presentation in store for you. So just get ready to put on your listening ears because she's going to do some readings for you guys, okay? So let's welcome Miss Nikki Grimes to Northside High School.
Poetry is a powerful genre for plumbing our deepest thoughts and feelings, and I've been telling stories this way from the earliest days of my career, and along the way I've discovered that the most powerful stories we tell are drawn from the fabric of our own lives, no matter how rough around the edges they may be. This is called Sanctuary. I shiver in my whisper-thin jacket and navigate the mean streets. My thoughts as hard and jagged as the broken sidewalk. I swagger past gang toughs, use razor-sharp glass to scare away possible danger. Pockets of safety are rare. I ignore the siren blare and step lively the moment my library comes into view. Almost there. I sprint the last few yards, charge up the stone steps breathless, and push through the double doors, smiling at the sweet kingdom of story, inviting me in to rest, to explore, to dream. Like the character in the poem I just read, when I was growing up, the library was a sanctuary to me, and I sorely needed one. My life as a teen was a disaster. My mother was in and out of mental institutions. I was constantly being moved from place to place in the foster care system, and my father, who was my very best friend, died. Then on top of everything else, my sister and I lived in a succession of urban war zones where knife and gunfights broke out on a regular basis. And I was a little bit too up close and personal with bullets on more than a few occasions. This made it very difficult for me to focus on anything good, and yet the books I read, and even more importantly, the poetry that I wrote, helped me to navigate that time in my life, both psychologically and emotionally. Every day I would pour my thoughts and feelings into poetry, and something about the process of doing that gave me strength and helped me to, kept me from disappearing under the weight of all that drama. Poetry can be that powerful. That's something I understand from the inside out. And that power is what Bronx Masquerade is all about. Not only can poetry give the poet voice, but when it is shared, it can also help to shape community. It can tear down walls and dissolve dividing lines. Sisters under the skin, we meet in the mirror, our images superimposed for one split second. Ready or not, I peer into your soul and dive deep, splash landing in a pool of pain as salty and familiar as the tears on my cheek. Your eyes don't like what I see. You don't want to be me, so you curse and smash the mirror, which gets you what? A bit of blood, a handful of splinters, another source of pain. Poetry can bring secrets out into the open. Onion skin, acid-free linen, 80% recycled fiber. The paper content doesn't much matter. My eyes see letters dancing backwards across whatever page they're printed on. The why is a mystery to me. Could it be I'm 1 gigabyte short? Or maybe I was born feet first? When the doctor smacked my bottom, did I laugh instead of cry? Do my thoughts trade places like letters on the sly? Such questions are enough to make you crazy if you're not. Dyslexia is a minor disturbance, nothing major once you learn your way around it, says the doc. As if he's a radio jock announcing a fender bender. Try the Triborough for smoother traffic the next time you take your mind for a spin. Notwithstanding, neurological distinction notwithstanding, something in me whispers freak every time I wriggle out of reading aloud or have to ask a stranger, "Excuse me, but what does that sign say?" Read me any way you choose. Only please stop asking, "What's his problem?" Poetry is about truth, personal truth, and nothing is more healing or more liberating. In case I forgot to tell you, I'm allergic to boxes. Black boxes, shoe boxes, new boxes, U-boxes, even cereal boxes boasting champions. It's all a lie. I've peeked inside, and what I found were flakes. Make no mistake, I make no exceptions for Cracker Jack or Christmas glitter. Haven't you noticed? I'm made of skeleton, muscle and skin. My body is the only box I belong in, but you like your boxes, so keep them. Mark them geek, wimp, bully. Mark them China doll, brainiac, or plain dumb jock. Choose whatever box you like, mate. Just don't put me in one, son. Believe me, I won't fit. I get letters from readers about this book all the time. And every reader seems to find at least one character he or she can relate to. And I like that. And I also love it when someone asks me where I found all those teenagers who could write poetry. And sometimes they're surprised to find out that I wrote it all. Which means I've done my job well, because I convinced my readers that these characters are real people and that the poetry I've written is their own. Now, Bronx Masquerade is a unique book for me, of course, in that it is written in 18 different voices. I love working in multiple voices, though it can be a little crazy making at times. This next book, though, was simple by comparison, because it's only written in 2 voices, and the title is Dark Sons. Dark Sons is my first novel written entirely in verse. It's a parallel story about Ishmael, son of Abraham, in the Bible, and Sam, a contemporary teen from Brooklyn, New York. Even though their stories are separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, it's amazing how much Ishmael and Sam have in common. Ishmael. He calls himself my father. So why is he sending me away? This is the question I'm tired of asking. Better to accept what I know. Between my mother and me, we have a bow, a loaf of bread, a water skin, and the clothes on our backs. No donkey laden with bags of grain, no tent to pitch against the rain or sun or swirling dust. Just lonely desert ahead, a carpet of sharp rock, a smattering of trees, miles of dry weed and briar without a settlement in sight. We can expect a company of wild goats or sheep, the few sturdy inhabitants of this terrain. Fresh well water is bound to be the stuff of dreams. My head hurts from imagining the worst. I ignore the tears in my eyes, pretend my father a few feet away is already dead, and take my mother's hand. All will be well, I tell her, sounding as manly as I can muster at 17, knowing full well that our survival will strictly be a matter of miracle. Sam. The moving van pulls away from the curb, cutting off my air supply. My anger a stammer, I stare through the window at the guy loading his car for the move from Brooklyn to Manhattan. He's supposed to be my dad. I'm glad he's not waiting for me to smile and wish him luck. Like I give a flying, what was he thinking? Leaving Mom in the first place. Why does he have to run off and start a new family like we aren't good enough, like I'm not all the son he'll ever need? And what about tomorrow? Child support won't put a dent in the rent. And Mom's hasn't worked a job in years. I don't want to bring on her tears, so I keep quiet. And when she comes up to me and slips an arm around my waist, I say, "Yo, Mom, not to worry. We'll be okay. It's all good. Sure, I know better. This city's just waiting to eat us up alive." Both boys feel abandoned by their fathers. Both wrestle with feelings of jealousy toward their half-brothers and struggle with an anger that makes each want to rip out his own heart. Their lives are tough, and so are their stories. And I can relate. Battered by a broken home in which one parent was an alcoholic and a paranoid schizophrenic, beaten up within a foster care system that is often less than perfect. It was my faith that ultimately made the difference in my life. And the same was true for Ishmael and Sam. As in all of my work, each character's story reflects some of my own truth. A Dark Suns is written in free verse, a form I use often, but I like to mix things up from time to time. And so I like to stretch myself, challenge myself, and so I throw in haiku, sonnets, tanka, a variety of poetry forms. And what I've learned is that you can use any and every poetry form to tell the stories you want to tell. All you have to do is master that form and then bend it to your will. A few years ago, I fell in love with an old Japanese poetry form called tanka. Tanka is a 5-line poem, often broken down into syllable counts, similar to haiku. In tanka, the syllable count is 5-7-5-7-7. It's a very strict structure, but there's something about structure that's also freeing. And as I said, you can make those 5 lines say whatever you need them to, whether the stories you have to tell are set in the suburbs or in the city, whether they take place in the past or in the present. They are your stories drawn from your life, and so you get to decide how to tell them. Here are a few tanka poems from my most recent novel, Garvey's Choice. Origami. Mom's got a talent for origami, but she can't fold me into the jock Dad wants me to be. At least she knows not to try. Angie. Angie's the athlete. Why should I compete with her? Why can't Garvey be like his sister? I heard Dad ask when I was 8. Mom said, "That's the wrong question. Ask Garvey what interests him. Talk to him, honey." Yeah, Dad, I thought, talk to me. But will he? I wish I knew. Summer lost and found. Stories are breadcrumbs. Just follow the trail of books, and you will find me lost among the galaxies of scorched stars and ships to Mars. Mom speaks. Later, Mom asks him, "Why don't you let Garvey be?" I hear Dad snort twice. "Why can't he put those books down, play tackle or basketball?" Garvey likes to read. When was that not a good thing? Thanks, Mom, I whisper. You're right, says Dad, but reading can't build muscles, can it? When I was his age, my papa and I always played. We roughed house like, well, normal. I go downstairs, grab a Coke, wash down Dad's disappointment. After I finished writing Garvey's Choice, I set out on a new challenge. This time I was inspired by a form of poetry I just discovered and was also inspired by the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance. Now, the poets of the Harlem Renaissance have always held a special place in my heart because I was born in Harlem Hospital, actually. And when I was 13, I did my very first poetry reading at the County Cullen Library, which is a block away. As a poet, I'm part of the continuum of those poets who took up residence in Harlem during the heyday of the Renaissance. And for those reasons, I feel close to those poets. We come from the same place, both literally and figuratively speaking. And so It was only natural I would want to explore their poetry with poetry of my own. My sister and I watch the 5 o'clock news, which spells out our worth in the world. According to reports, it's somewhere on the minus side. That may be only hearsay, but how can I live long enough to disprove the lie? How can I stay strong in a world where fear and hate wait outside my door? My teacher tells me to go in search of counsel, back to the Harlem Renaissance, when poetry burst like a dam and a river of wisdom words rushed through the streets I call home. Can I really find fuel for the future in the past? Less sure than desperate, I dip my spoon into the bowl of years, stir till I reach the Renaissance, and find a few choice lines to chew on. And I think, we'll see. We'll see. That's the opening of One Last Word. I watched the Oscars recently, and one of the films being talked about was Hidden Figures. This movie is about African American women heroes of the early NASA program. They were brilliant mathematicians and engineers, and yet most of us had never even heard of them. We should not be surprised. When it comes to historical records, the achievements of women have almost always been either downplayed or absent altogether. That's true whether you're talking about the arts or the sciences or just about any other field of endeavor. For example, the name Mozart is recognized the world over, as it should be. Amadeus Mozart was a brilliant musician. But how many people know that his sister, Maria Anna, nicknamed Nannerl, was an equally talented musician and composer? Even her legendary brother admired her abilities, especially her compositions, yet you've probably never even heard of her. Bessie Coleman, the first African American woman to gain a license as a pilot, has only come to light in recent years, yet her accomplishments were historical. The world knows the name Rodin, the sculptor famous for his work, The Thinker. Yet Harriet Hosmer, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, and Camille Claudel, Rodin's biggest inspiration, are less celebrated sculptors of the same period. There's definitely a pattern here, and that bothers me. And for that reason, from time to time, I move to write a book featuring some of the remarkable women of the past. In talking about Bessie, I did so by crafting a biography of Bessie Coleman. In Chasing Freedom, I did so by exploring the lives of Harriet Tubman and Susan B. Anthony and the relationship with one another. And most recently, I did so by bringing to light some of the women poets from the Harlem Renaissance. Now, there are a good many books about the Harlem Renaissance, but over the years, I began to notice that few of them featured the women poets of the period. I occasionally came across the work of Georgia Douglas Johnson, but that was about the extent of it. Were there no other women poets from the Harlem Renaissance? I began to wonder. Then, while reading a scholarly text about women of the period, I discovered several female Renaissance poets I had never heard of. There was Clara Thompson, Jessie Fawcett, and Gwendolyn Bennett, among others. Why not write a collection celebrating a few of these women? That was the spark that led me to write One Last Word, Wisdom from the Harlem Renaissance. Now, around the same time, I was trying to come up with a worthy writing project to make use of a new poetry form I had just learned of. The form was called the Golden Shovel. And in this form, you take a line from an existing poem and line up the words one by one in the right margin, and then write a new line ending in that word. So that if the line was "Peace be still," the first line would end in peace, the second would end in be, and the last line would end in still. The lines have to make sense, of course, and they have to work together to create a new poem. It's a very challenging form, and that's precisely what I love about it. I like trying things that scare me, things that I'm not sure I can pull off, and I always have. So I got the idea to use this form to create a book about poets from the Harlem Renaissance, including women poets of the period, and One Last Word was born. Now, while you may not have heard of Gwendolyn Bennett or Clarence Thompson or even Georgia Douglas Johnson, chances are you have heard of Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, Jean Toomer, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, some of the male poets in the collection. The poems of the Harlem Renaissance are especially meaningful right now because these poets were dealing with some of the same social issues that we're facing today. Yet, despite Jim Crow laws, frequent lynchings, and daily discrimination, these artists not only survived, but thrived. Their poems reflect the wisdom that made that possible. They have a lot to say to us today. The poems I chose by each poet are some of my personal favorites, and a few are definitely classics. I'm going to spend the rest of my time reading some of these poems, and afterwards I'll take questions if there are any. I'll start off with Calling Dreams, a poem by Georgia Douglas Johnson. The right to make my dreams come true I ask, nay, I demand of life, nor shall fate's deadly contraband impede my steps, nor countermand. Too long my heart against the ground has beat the dusty years around, and now at length I rise, I wake, and stride into the morning break. I took the first line of this poem and wrote one of my own called The Sculptor. No accident of birth or race or place determines the scope of hope or dreams I have a right to. I inventory my head and heart to weigh and measure what talents I might use to make my own tomorrow. It all depends on the grit at my disposal. My father says, hard work is the clay dreams are molded from. Excuse me. Yes, molded. Dreams do not come. They are carved, muscled into something solid, something true. One of my favorite poems by Clara Ann Thompson, titled Life and Death. Begins. We live, and how intense is life? So full of stress, so full of strife, so full of hopes, so full of fears, of joy and sorrow, smiles and tears. And how fruitless is the quest unless you're striving for the best. I use these words to write a poem entitled Crucible of Champions. If you listen carefully to the poem, you'll hear the echo of Thompson's words. Jamar. The evening news never spares us. Tune in and we hear. If you're a boy and you're black, you live with a target on your back. We each take it in and shiver. One sharp-bladed question hanging overhead. How long do I get to walk this earth? The smell of death is too intense, and so we bury the thought, because the future is ours, right? We get to choose? Well, we choose life. Dina. Stupid is the word that stalks me. I'm anything but, so I seethe inside. Even on a good day, I'm full of an anger that burns my breath. Why? It's all because of my diagnosed dyslexia. Ask me to read aloud, I stress. Whenever the teacher calls on me in class, I stutter. So most folks surmise that my head is hollow. Actually, it's quite full. My words and letters simply switch places. They've got a mind of their own. I call that reason enough for stress, for strife. Helena. I've never met a marine biologist, so what makes me think I could be one? My head is full of fantasies that don't fit other people's ideas of what's possible. They tell me I should squeeze my hopes into a miniature box of their design. But I'm not so inclined. Their infinitesimal perceptions are not for me. I'm full as a piñata, stuffed with daring and delectable dreams of all I can truly be. There's hardly room for doubts, for fears. Damien. No one cuts you any slack if you're a boy, especially of a particular hue, and you decide to find your joy in ballet. Never mind that it's tough as any sport and gives you a perfect place to pack whatever sorrow shadows you. Flex, point, leap, and you're all smiles before you know it. Dance is demanding too, and the strength it takes would leave most jocks in tears. Cora. Lips zipped, I fight to keep silent, to fit in, and when I speak, I whisper. It's silly, I know, but oh, don't the boys love it? Besides, it's how the popular girls behave. It's tiresome, though. Even fruitless to pretend to be somebody you're not. Like Mom says, life is too short. Better to take a lonelier road, discover the who of you. That journey is the best quest. Blake. Coach reminds me I'll be stuck in a do-nothing job unless I win one of the basketball scholarships we're all after. Would steroids multiply the effects of my striving? I consider giving them a try, but cheating is not for champions. I'd rather pass the test for the strongest, the fastest, top-notch version of me. Then I'll truly be one of the best. One of the Langston Hughes' best-known poems is The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. And that last line is the one I took to create David's Old Soul. As far back as I can remember, my mother has called me an old soul. I never understood. But now that our family has dwindled to just Mom and us kids, I've grown into a man. You do what you have to. David, dig deep is the whisper in my ear, so I stand strong like a tree my brothers can lean on. I try to be the raft that helps carry them over this life's rough rivers. As I did research for women of the Harlem Renaissance, I was most excited to find the work of Gwendolyn Bennett. These are lines from one of her poems titled To Usward. Let us be still as ginger jars are still upon a Chinese shelf, and let us be contained by entities of self. Not still with lethargy and sloth, but quiet with the pushing of our growth. Not self-contained with smug identity, but conscious of the strength in entity. These words led me to write the poem, In Search of a Superpower. Children. Umbrage has its place, but sometimes we must let small injustices and the casual spray of invective spit at us roll off our backs. My grandma would say, we be better than such meanness. Show hatred the door and be still. A calm demeanor may masquerade as weakness, but looks deceive. Uncut ginger appears an ordinary worthless root, till opened jars of it infuse the air with its tang so strong, you are bound to blink. Hours later, its power lingers still. On difficult days, gather your resources in silence. Rely upon the perfect poetic justice. History always has a way of serving. The ancients, Africans, Chinese, knew how to master patience, leave small annoyances on a shelf. I know inner strength is an old man's game, and you are young yet, but this life won't let you hang on to your innocence any more than it let us. The world can be a dangerous place, and you must be prepared to face it with more grace, less swagger. Contained power is the goal. The mean strut you naturally come by gives too much away. Superman, Wonder Woman, these entities disguise their true might, understanding the advantage of hiding their abilities in plain sight. Each maintained a secret self until those moments when his or her controlled force, not fury, was required. They were the model of cool. Still, at times, Clark Kent could play clumsy. Even so, with his zeal for truth and news, none would accuse him of lethargy. He moved fast enough to stay ahead of the game, and you must too. Walk with measured steps, always intent. Even the sloth has purpose. Wish I'd understood that when I was young. But I was all brash and stomp back then, never quiet, never noticing how or where I stepped or with whom. Not all movement is forward. Better to be like the tree, grounding itself by sinking roots downward while pushing upward through hard-packed earth in search of sun. All done silently, mysteriously, right before our eyes. Confidence can rise as stealthily as the redwood's growth. Cockiness is something else altogether, a thing not to be emulated. Better an easy laugh and a pride self-contained. Any thug can pretend manliness with a crude swagger, a nasty smirk, or a smug attitude. Mark my word, rudeness makes for a poor identity. Stand tall, head held high at all times, but bow humbly when the occasion warrants. Be conscious of the treasure of your mind and heart, the pride of your ancestry, the debt you owe those who came before. The future requires steadiness, perseverance, strength. Gives you access with the key of your will. The power you seek is in sight. Look in the mirror. Own yourself. You are that entity. Now, maybe you're in search of a superpower to get through this life. I wouldn't blame you. But the power you seek is in sight. And you'll find it when you look in the mirror. Okay. Questions? Okay. Yes.
What made writing each book difficult for you? Like, was there any difficulty in what made it difficult?
Oh, every book is difficult in different ways. Bronx Masquerade, I guess, well, a couple of challenges. Making sure each character was distinctly drawn enough to tell from all the others. But I think for me, the biggest challenge in that book was writing poetry in the voice of each character. And making sure, because I have my own voice as a poet, but I had to get out of myself and just focus on each individual character and find their voice to create their own poetry.
And I know earlier we spoke and you said that like when you go throughout life, like you're a visual person, you notice things and you see things and you hear things and you like save them in your head and you like use those for later voices in your books. Is that what like help create Bronx Masquerade? Is that what like help with the voices and like putting their own personality with each character? Absolutely,
Yeah. I do have a file of people in my head I walk around with. It's very crowded up here. Yeah.
Who's your favorite character and who's your least favorite character that you create?
Well, I love all my characters. I have to in order to write them. Sterling is probably the most like me. Well, certainly in certain aspects because we share the faith aspect. But there's a little bit of me probably in each character. Just a little something that's true. But I'd say probably closer to Sterling than anybody else I can think of. Yeah.
What was your inspiration for A Girl Named Mister?
I'm really fascinated with Mary, and I always have been. And I actually have a book called Portrait of Mary, where I look at the Christ story from Mary's perspective. And so when I decided I wanted to do a book about teen pregnancy, I decided I wanted to do that, a parallel story, and have a contemporary teen, and have Mary having what her experience might have been in that time. So, and just the challenge of that. Yeah.
What was your inspiration for Jasmine's Notebook? Like when I first started reading it, I was like, I wasn't confused, but it was like right off the bat it caught my attention. So I wanted to know like what made you think of to write something like that?
Jasmine's Notebook started out as a collection of stories about, drawn from my life with my sister, time I lived with my sister. And so it just started out as a collection, a loose collection of stories about that time when I lived with her, memories I had of her. And it grew into more than that, but that was what it started out being.
So would you say like, I know earlier when we also spoke, you said that poetry was your way of expressing yourself. So would you say like some of your stories are based off not only personal experiences, but another way to express how you feel, not only how you feel, but to portray as of how people would see it, I just want to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always look to, not always, but I often look to memories of my own childhood for the stuff of story that I use. So I do write stories that come from that place or that come from that experience. That's the germ. They take on a very different life in the story themselves, but very often that is the germ. But sometimes it has nothing to do with my life. It might be something I've observed in someone else's life,
Right.
Something that just stuck with me. I have a chapter book series about a character named Diamond Daniel, and one of the stories in it is about Diamond asking her mother for high-top sneakers and telling her that she has to get them for her because she's her mom, which someone in school told her that she could do and that it would be okay, and of course it was not okay. And the problems that resulted from that came from a friend of mine whose daughter in Catholic school came home one day and asked for something. I don't remember what it was. And her, she said, "You have to do this because you're my mom." And the next day when the girl came home, she found everything cleared out of her room. All of her music, her posters, everything was gone. And her mother explained that what I have to do for you is put a roof over your head and feed you, and everything else is extra. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to use that. And I filed it away, And so then it came out in the story about somebody who's much younger. It's a very different kind of story, but that was the germ of that story. And I walked around with that for, 20 years before I ever used it. But it was in there. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that one. So sometimes it's not my story, it's someone else's.
And I'm gonna just keep talking. And also besides like Tonka, like what would you say is another form of besides Tonka, what would you say another form of like poetry would you say is best to use in like stories like such as your own?
You can use any form of poetry.
Like what would you say? What would you recommend like is the best though?
There is no best. It's a question of what your strength is, and you go with that. Because there's stories written in sonnets. I've written in Tonka and free verse. Most people will probably start off with free verse, but you can make any form work.
Okay,
Yes.
What inspired you to start writing books, period? Like, was it just your love for books? Or?
Yeah. Well, I've been writing since I was 6. And when I first started writing, a lot of it was just about getting things off my chest, and writing was for me a survival tool. And then later on, I started thinking about it in terms of a career. And I wanted to write books because books were so important to me as a reader. That feeling that, you think nobody really understands what you're going through, and then you'll read a book and you'll come across a character who seems to be like you or seems to have that same experience, and you suddenly realize that you're not all alone in the world. And that's something very, very powerful. Well, there weren't enough books like that had anybody in them who looked like me. And so I wanted to create some of those books and those stories that resonated with my life experience for other readers, so that they would have that same experience and like, hey, somebody knows me. Somebody else has experienced what I have. Yes.
I noticed in A Girl Named Mister, it kind of ended like on a cliffhanger in a way. Like we don't know if she really kept the baby or not.
We talked about
Yeah,
that
you
earlier.
don't.
I think it was meant to keep it open-minded.
Not that particular thing, but I like to leave a story open-ended because life is open-ended. And we don't know the end of the story until we get to the end, and that's not the end of the book. The story goes on and on. In this particular case, though, what was important were the questions that she had to consider in making the decision, not so much the decision itself. So I like to just leave that up in the air.
Did you keep the baby?
We all got that question.
I don't know. Yeah.
So, one of the lines, I name him mine, if only for a moment. That means nothing.
Sorry?
Slow down, Jacob.
Hey, I name him mine, if only for a moment. That means nothing? Because I thought it was like she gives the baby away.
What do you think?
I think she puts the baby up for adoption. Or she changes it to-
That's quite possible she did.
I waited this long.
Well, been having them questions.
No.
How old? Wait. How old is Trey?
Yeah, you for real.
How old is Trey? I guess
Come on, man. I waited so long for this.
I'm assuming he's like 17.
Oh, 17? I said 17.
You should make another one like with the baby, so we know.
No.
I said 16 or 17.
Yeah.
Okay, is the baby name actually mine?
No. What?
Now y'all need to stop.
She said I named
She didn't actually name him.
Tell her that.
Did your mom name you baby?
They named her Miss.
They have people
But
named
your-
baby.
Guys,
I know
come
they
on.
have names. I'm just saying that's a I know they
What are you getting here with her?
No, that's not her real name. I'm just saying her name is Miss.
Anybody else with a question?
I'm in awe.
Yeah, it's Mary Rodine. Her nickname is
Okay, some more questions?
Mr. Reed.
Why should
Oh.
You're not in.